Pod Candy!
A podcast about cults, crimes, and killers. Well, Dr. John Maya, Netflix is finally giving Ed Gein the star treatment with his own episodes on the series Monster, the Ed Gein Story.
Well, they're a little late to the party. We've done 2 episodes on Eddie and had experts on Pod Candy to talk about him.
Yeah, those were some of our first episodes. 2 of our best.
They're all our best. It is important to note that the Netflix series is fictional portrayal of events. And in our series, we stick to the realities and the deeper explanations of why, when, how.
Yeah, between the psychology, the local legends, and the way his story basically rewired pop culture, he's sort of the grandfather of American horror. So today we're giving you a mashup of some of our favorite clips from past episodes with first-hand accounts from people close to the story, a little horror movie history from a returning guest, the expert Adam Rockoff, and of course, Dr. John Maya doing what he does best, crawling inside the mind of a monster.
You make it sound like I enjoy it.
You kind of do.
Okay, fair. But seriously, stick around until the end, because we've got our resident slasher film expert, Adam, joining us to get his take on the Netflix Monster, the Ed Gein Story.
You don't want to miss it. All right, let's get into it. This is our Ed Gein mashup episode.
Outside my window, it's only raining. When the wind blows, I feel pain. I don't need no doctor, baby, I'm not sick. My body's been locked up, heartbroken ever since.
Stacey, I knew nothing about this man.
Really?
I hear of, I watch so much stuff, as you know. I knew literally the name did not come across to me until Ryan Murphy announced that he was doing another Monsters series starring that Charlie Hunnam. And that is how I'm like, oh, can we do an episode on Ed Gein? I know nothing about this man.
And I should also mention that this, we watched a documentary called Ed Gein, which was produced and directed by my very own brother, Alex, and his business partner, Adam. They put it together, produced it, and it's really wonderful. It's about 45 minutes, and it's got some interviews, and it's really cool. And that's what we used as our source material.
There's something about Gein that appeals to the morbid curiosity within all of us. It's so macabre, so bizarre, so deviant that we can't look away.
So Ed Gein, so psychotic that he inspired Norman Bates from Psycho, and inspired the Texas Chainsaw Murder Massacre.
Murder Massacre. And he inspired Silence of the Lambs, the Buffalo Bill character, who made, objects out of human skin, etc.
There was what the police called a mammary vest, the upper torso of a woman that Gein had taken from the body and preserved and attached straps to. And then there were leggings that had been made from the skin of a woman's legs.
And at times, It was reported that he would sometimes walk around with this mammary vest that he had managed to make from female anatomy, and he would attach it to his body.
And apparently also sometimes take one of the female genitals that he had removed from a corpse and stick those on himself as well and pretend to be a woman.
We have the creator, director, producer, and my brother, Alex Flaster, on today to answer questions about Ed Gein. He's an expert. And we have the famous author, Adam Rockoff, who wrote horror books. He wrote a horror book based on Ed Gein. Am I correct about that, Adam? Based on
Not
Ed
based
Gein?
on Ed Gein, but I wrote a book about slasher movies, and a lot of these great slasher movies, they take a lot from both the Ed Gein case and the Ed Gein legend.
Yeah, so he can answer our questions about how Ed Gein got into the pop culture as all these different characters. Are things based on Ed Gein because he was early on in the 50s? Or is it because that case was so unbelievable? People say it's so unbelievably awful. For me, I know it's awful. Don't get me wrong. Gacy, Dahmer, and Ted Bundy, to me, are scarier. And explain why, either of you.
Gein was really the first. I mean, you have to remember when this case broke in 57, we were a decade removed from World War II. So we knew about the horrors of war, the horrors of the Holocaust, but those were foreign horrors. They weren't on our shores. They were over in Europe where terrible things happen. And also people were aware during this time that, the big cities were dangerous places. Terrible things happen in the cities, of course. But Gein really sort of just blew open the door that there are monsters living in Middle America. And Middle America, literally and figuratively, I mean, Wisconsin is smack dab in the middle of the country. And that little town encapsulates hundreds of thousands of other little towns everywhere. And I think people realized, or maybe not realized, but thought and had the fear, if it could happen here in Plainfield, it could happen anywhere.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that because it's just like the phenomena of the Exorcist, the movie The Exorcist when that came out. You have to look at some of these horrific events in the context of the social milieu at the time. There was nothing like The Exorcist when it came out. Now, I've asked a couple of my young nephews. I said, we'll have a discussion. What's the scariest movie ever? And I'll go, it was The Exorcist. Well, I was a little kid when The Exorcist came out, and it frightened me to the core, especially being a Catholic kid with the church and the devil and all that stuff. And you hit it on the head with Ed Gein. At the time when this broke, media was just, becoming, more widespread. We could hear about these things. You wouldn't in the early 50s, 40s, you wouldn't necessarily hear about something in Wisconsin until you read it in your local physical newspaper 2 weeks later. But this broke. There was TV cameras all around. So it's a phenomena that Adam hit right on the head, which was that it broke the Iron Curtain of this kind of horror.
Alex.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to hear a little bit about your experience working on the show, working on the Ed Gein case. Did you meet anybody who knew Ed? Mm-hmm. I believe you did, but did you meet like the people in the town? Like, how were you incorporated? Like, did you go to the town? Tell us about that experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was, I was working at a company in Chicago and I was assigned the project. It was an episode of the A&E series biography. It was initially, they wanted me to do a show on John Gotti, Teflon Don, but that fell apart. I don't remember why. And then they gave me the Ed Gein case. I didn't know who the hell he was. I had no idea. So I looked it up and, I found it fascinating. And the thing I found most fascinating about the Gein case wasn't really the crime. It was the legend, how he had just been all these characters from these movies that I'd seen growing up were based on him. The three that we talk about in the show are Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Silence of the Lambs. So I did my job, which is, trying to find people out there that were involved in the case. And I produced this in early 2000s, and the case was in 57. So I was certainly fortunate that there were still people that were alive. And that was, I think, the thing that really sort of blew my mind and what makes it such a special project, which is this guy is in many ways, and we talk about it in the show, is he, there's like the myth of him. He's like the boogeyman in many ways. And to be able to meet people that actually spoke to the boogeyman, that had him in his house, that worked with him, that had lunch with him, that saw him in the streets and interacted with him, was just such a fascinating and rewarding experience. The case took place in Plainfield, Wisconsin. I was living in Chicago at the time, so it's just a quick drive across the border. So yeah, I was in Plainfield. I was there several times. It's a small, tiny town. You wouldn't think anything of it. It is like a million tiny little towns in Wisconsin, barely a main street, barely anything really. And yeah, it was a terrific experience. And like I said, it was this pop culture connection, I think, that really drew me into the Gein story. I mean, unlike my partner and good friend Adam, I don't like horror movies. I've seen a lot of them. It was growing up, it was kind of a rite of passage to have to watch all these fucking movies like, Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween and all these movies. I didn't particularly enjoy them, but I knew I had to watch them because otherwise, you're a wuss. This was the 80s. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre in particular, obviously it's a horrifying movie. And it's scary and it's well done and it's gritty and all this stuff. But there was one aspect of the movie that just left an imprint on me and that just scared the hell out of me, unlike other horror movies. Adam, you commented it on in the show. I think. Do you remember what it is? What is it about Texas Chainsaw Massacre that creeped me out? A certain fact that in the beginning of the film that creeped me out more than any other horror movie. What do you think it was?
I'm going to assume it's the title card that says it's based on a true story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is when you see that and you're like, holy shit, Leatherface walking around with a giant chainsaw. How the hell is this story based on a true story? And then you start doing research and there's Psycho and there's Buffalo Bill. I mean, these are some profound characters in the history of cinema that, have left an imprint on so many people's minds. And it's all attached to this, all linked back to this one little unassuming 5'6", little man living in Plainfield, Wisconsin, nowhere, Wisconsin, in 1957. How the hell is that possible? And just being able to unpack that and talk to people that actually knew him and interacted with them, especially those journalists too that came to the town. And it was an amazing experience professionally and personally.
I'm going to say something very controversial.
Okay.
The photos that they showed in the documentary of Ed Gein, I thought he was kind of a looker. I'm not going to lie. I was like, this guy.
He was cute. Kind of cute.
I would not swipe left. I would swipe right.
What about this Ed Gein that they're doing in that series? He's too good looking. Like, the guy's hot. Ed Gein
yeah, Charlie.
What's up with that? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
I will say Dori did say Ed Gein was cute, which kind of, startled me.
Yeah. Well, he was cute, but he wasn't hot.
He wasn't hot, and not as the killer, but back in the day, they showed one photo over and over and over again in that documentary, and I'm like, you know what? Bangable.
Gein's murders, and there were only two, three if you include the brother, but it's still unclear. So I mean, in the world of serial killers, he technically isn't even a serial killer. But his were impulsive. He saw something in these women that were, Adam and I were talking about this the other day. in terms of why he killed these women, Mary Hogan, who was the bar owner, and then Bernice Worden, who was the hardware store owner, I think he saw them as a sort of antithesis of his mother, the type of person his mother preached against. Mary Hogan was, she swore, she drank, she was whorish, all those things that her mother would say about women. And then Bernice Worden was a self-possessed business owner. That also is not something that his mother would take pride in. So I think those were factors. Now, the other factor in him picking these victims, I think, might have been more practical. We know what he did with the bodies. These were large women. I don't know if you've seen Silence of the Lambs, you kind of know where I'm going with this. So that might have been a factor too. But in terms of the murder, they were very impulsive. Mary Hogan, I mean, there was blood on the floor. He shot her on sight. There wasn't a process behind it. There wasn't he wasn't trying to torture her. He was trying to, and John, I mean, his crimes have always sort of made sense to me in a really weird way, in that if you take a guy who had, whether he's schizophrenic, I mean, clearly he was mentally ill, who had this mother who was the quintessential religious, preaching, psychologically damaging mother. Think, from the movie Carrie or something like that. It all sort of traces back to Ed Gein's mom. You take it in 1957, you take it in this farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, and then she dies and he's just left alone, and he's looking for a way to reconnect with his mother, and in his own twisted, weird, fucked up way, quite frankly, this is how he does it. It's horrifying, but he, makes these suits and wears the skin and, in the body parts and and it always sort of made sense to me. If you take all of these factors, middle of nowhere, severely mentally ill, crazy ass mother, she dies, left alone to his own devices, and he's missing this connection. Norman Bates kept his mom up in the attic. What does Ed Gein do? How does Ed Gein reconnect? And that was how he chose to do it. It's crazy, it's fucked up, it's disgusting, and it spawned a gazillion different movies. But it always sort of, just a twisted, bizarre, weird way, and I'm not sure what this says about me, it always sort of made sense to me. Gein, what he did. I don't know. John, am I crazy?
What you're describing, Alex, is what we call in my field a linear analysis. That A plus B equals C. With this.
The pretty fucked up C, though.
Oh yeah.
What about the fact that he wore that female skin suit and paraded around? Do you think, Doctor, is there any possibility that he was possibly transgender, a cross-dresser? Is there any thinking of that?
Correlation?
Or was it just why would he wear it? Did he want to be his mother? Did he want to be a woman? What do you think about that?
I think your last statement is where I would go with it. Again, I wouldn't be able to diagnose whether he was transgender or gay, etc., without, talking to him and digging a little deeper. But I will say, to me, for Ed, again, we go back to that primitiveness and that almost undeveloped person. That kind of experimentation is, I'm going to shock you guys, is not that uncommon with kids as they explore sexuality. There's a lot of very macho male heterosexual men are walking around this world that when they were 8, 9, 10 years old, they tried on mommy's dress and maybe have masturbated,
Yeah. But
because,
this is an older man.
but the undevelopedness of him.
But because you're saying he's childlike even as he's older.
He was stuck at a developmental period that was just stopped, undeveloped.
It's so interesting that you say that, because one of my questions, which you're answering, was, did his mother stunt his growth by infantilizing him?
Absolutely.
making him so just babyish.
Yeah, and she might have seen she couldn't do that with Henry for whatever reason, and so that's her little boy. That's her little child and
her little project.
Yeah,
which
I
she
wouldn't
probably
be
didn't
surprised if
realize.
she, even at his age, had a spoonful of oatmeal and go, "Open your mouth, here comes the plane," etc.
He did do well in the institution. And it was because the thinking is he had routine. And I don't know if what your thoughts are on that he went in for, I don't know, the first in 11 years, then he went to trial and they said bring him back to the institution and lived out his life until he passed away from cancer. But what do you think about that? Like, because the mother obviously gave him that routine, right? Like that was his
Right.
routine. And then she died. And then, like you said, like he was like a free for all, like, okay, now I can just go and,
No
do
structure. No
right.
structure.
Yeah,
But was it an
exactly.
evil intent or was it just a like, I can do whatever I want? And then he goes back into the institution where he has that
Right.
structure and then he's, quote unquote, okay.
Remind me to talk about evil because you guys brought that up right before I was
Yes.
brought on here. I want to talk, but let me address the first part of your
Yes.
question. His mother gave him the rules of life per her purview, right? Women
Right.
are bad, the Bible is truth and, got to follow this, whatever. So he's controlled. He's controlled
Right.
in prison. And that's what if I can wax philosophical here about the whole field of mental health for a second, and also gives the audience some of my prejudices, that's a problem with how we treat these severely mentally ill people in the age of therapists that go, well, if that's something you like to do, well, then I guess it's okay as long as you're not hurting someone. When I treat people in therapy, there are rules, there are things we know in the science of this field that you got to go, no, you don't do that. Sorry, this is not appropriate. So you see rules, and Stacey said the right word, which is structure.
Right.
It's very important for a severely mentally ill person to have structure. And that's why he held it together when mom was living. If she had ever found out he was digging up graves and, taking nipples and vaginas and things like that, she would have probably went ape on him and, whatever. But she, again, as I said before, she dies and boom, Katie barred a door.
This whole thing about the woman, the Oedipal complex. What happened to the mother? I mean, think about that. What is the psychology behind fanaticism for her? And this is a bigger topic, but just a brief overview of Augusta.
I can only guess. And the key is always the key with a woman like that is what happened in this marriage. The guy was an alcoholic. Again, let's just extrapolate. I'll just based on cases that I've worked on. The guy was alcoholic, maybe physically abusive, and controlling and putting her down. So the only refuge that she had was the Bible, and following the Lord. And now she did have the balls, shall we say, that's a clinical term, to leave him and get away, from him with the kids, which, wow, there's some health there. But I got a feeling that marriage was the key to, just breaking this woman. And,
Oh, yeah.
this kind of world, this kind of society, hey, she might have married this guy when she was, 17, 18, something like that, and just dominated by this. And from a primitive background, and this is what you do. You follow the man, because the man is, king, etc.
Right. Don't forget to stay tuned to the end of this episode for Adam Rockoff's take on the Netflix series Monster, the Ed Gein Story.
I had another question for Adam.
I'm listening.
Because I'm curious, what you think about, like, there are obviously these real stories that, like Stacey and I are so fascinated about. And then the movies that are done on these stories. What is your feeling about turning these like true crime stories into movies? How much do you think that movies need to stay to the storyline? Do you think movies are better about these disgusting crimes than the actual documentaries that go about them? Talk a little bit about that for us.
I think it depends completely on the specific movie, on the specific work of art. One of the things about Gein that is so interesting is, as awful as his crimes were, if you look at the movies, at least the big ones that were made right after, or because we were talking about it before, let's just say Texas Chainsaw and let's say Silence of the Lambs, the filmmakers made a conscious choice, obviously, not to stay too close to the story. And the reason I think for that is because it was more horrific and more interesting to make the carriers more in the classic mold of serial killers who actually went out and stalked their prey and killed them. I mean, there's no doubt when you look at both Leatherface and Texas Chainsaw, Buffalo Bill and Silence of the Lambs, that these guys are far, far scarier than old Ed Gein was sitting in his shack in Plainfield.
My personal opinion is 9 times out of 10, I think. I mean, regardless of how true the movie stays to the actual story, most of the time a documentary is more horrifying. The one movie that jumps out at me that, I mean, it's also kind of even loosely based, but I think it's fascinating. You know, Adam is a fan as well. You referenced it the other day, at least the second one, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. That's a phenomenal movie. And I think it was based on Henry Lee Lucas. So, and it wasn't, you know, and it's not really, I don't even know the Lucas case well enough. I mean, there's a lot of sort of kind of like Gein. I think Lucas, there's a lot of sort of question of, did he kill as many people as he claims kind of thing. But the movie is amazing. I mean, and it's horrifying and it really gets into the psychosis of the person. But for the most part, I think a documentary is more horrifying.
It goes back to that this really happened. This is reality rather than we know. That's one of the ways in which people cope with horror movies, especially gruesome horror movies. You can distance yourself from it because, you know, this is not going to happen. It's Hollywood. They made it up, you know, it's exaggerated. So it's not real. But when you have a documentary like you made, Alex Flaster, you know, it really brings us to, wow, this is reality. And these people lived with it.
On our second episode of Pod Candy, we had the horror expert Adam Rockoff, author of the book on horror films titled The Horror of It All. Adam has graciously agreed to come on Pod Candy again to talk to us about his thoughts on the Netflix series.
I'm excited. Adam is great, and I learned a lot from his book and also his last appearance on our show.
Adam, welcome.
Adam, I am so anxious to hear what you think of the series on Ed Gein.
Well, in keeping with the subject matter and keeping with the subject of slashing, I think you could have lopped off 2 to 3 episodes of the whole series. Specifically, the last 2, maybe even the last 3. There's so much to unpack here because, I mean, it is an 8-episode series and some episodes were even over an hour. I guess we can start by saying it is by far the most comprehensive look at Gein that we've ever seen in cinema, just by nature of it being a series instead of a one-off doc or a movie. And I guess there's 2 main things we really have to look at and discuss and analyze. And they are, you know, are we going to look at this, you know, are we going to talk about this as a Hollywood product, which we're all watching for entertainment and enjoyment and maybe a little bit of education? Or on the other side, are we looking at this as a faithful representation about who Gein, the person, really was? I mean, those are 2 distinct different things. If we're looking at it, you know, just as a piece of entertainment, there's still a lot to unpack there. I would say the big thing that we want to think about is maybe the main creative choice that the showrunner or director or producer or whomever really, got their hands dirty with this, the main choice that they made. And that was cross-cutting or interspersing the Gein story with different stories throughout history about how Gein has impacted the world and the culture we live in. And I think some of those little vignettes worked well. I love the Alfred Hitchcock one about when he's meeting with the writer Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho, trying to get that project off the ground.
Gein was schizophrenic, was he not?
Yes, they are often triggered in early adulthood. And for Eddie, it really seemed like the trigger was these photographs of Nazi atrocities.
And had he not seen them?
Might have stayed a small-town simpleton.
Such is the power of the photographed image.
That's right. You cannot hide from what a photograph shows you. You cannot pretend a photograph is anything other than what it is. A photograph is truth.
That's right.
And Eddie, when he saw what the Nazis did, he couldn't wrap his head around it. He was completely stunned, but I really think that the horror of it never registered. What Eddie saw in those photos was the truth, and the truth is, here's just another thing that people did, like riding a bike or drawing a picture. And so Eddie wanted to do it too. Some sort of morbid fascination. And we really couldn't understand what was wrong about it.
About digging up dead bodies, do you mean?
Well, among other things.
You'll have to excuse me, Mr. Block. Psycho is a fantastic book, and I congratulate you on its success. But Alfred, no one's going to want to watch this film. You'll have to excuse me before I say something I regret.
She's right, of course. This is not cinema that anyone will recognize. It is entirely new. But she's dead wrong to say people won't want to watch it. Our audience lives in a world in which God has been banished. They live in daily fear of nuclear annihilation. They have stared, quaking, minds numb, at the sheer magnitude of the evil that was the Nazi Holocaust, seen for the first time in history what human beings are capable of when the moral compass is off. Lost.
I also love to see, just because I'm a horror movie buff, the backstory about Tobe Hooper and how he came up with the idea for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And we even got a little surreal when he starts chainsawing people in the middle of the Montgomery Ward department store. I mean, that, by all accounts, really happened. Not that the chainsawing in the store didn't happen, but Tobe had those fantasies, and that's how the genesis of Texas Chainsaw Massacre came about. Other ones that I thought, and this might just be a personal thing, didn't work so well. I didn't like the whole Tony Perkins thing, him struggling with his sexuality. I know you can draw a parallel to Gein and how he struggled, but I just didn't think that was that compelling.
Well, I'm in love with him. I know I shouldn't be, but I am. The problem is when we,
Fornicate.
Yes. When we fornicate, afterwards I become ill. Every time.
You said the act of sodomy felt
monstrous.
And are you a monster?
No. No.
You ought to consider these episodes a warning, Anthony. You're the star of an Alfred Hitchcock picture. This is the opportunity of a lifetime, is it not?
Yes.
The sodomy threatens this. So the sodomy has to stop.
I really didn't like the ending where you see Gein being called on by all these profilers to help catch other serial killers. That could because that didn't happen in the real world.
I couldn't agree more with everything you're saying. I just want to interrupt.
Please.
Say, yeah, I agree. I loved because it's fictional, and I think that's the lens we got to look at it on. I loved the backstories with the other movies, but I didn't like this whole thing with the Nazi, the bitch of Buchenwald, and I thought that was filler. Which, by the way, brings me to one of my pet peeves about series lately, and I think you will agree based on your opening, Adam, is that it just seems like they get contracted to produce 8 episodes, and so they have to fill in, with material. And I think that is where the series suffers, is that it seems like they're filling in material. I also, real quick, and I'll get back to you, I agree. I thought the last episode was needless and kind of silly. But an important point from my professional point of view, the other thing I have kind of objected to, and I'd like to hear your comments on, they portrayed Eddie at the end when he's in the mental hospital like he was reformed, or he was a gentle soul who just was, innocuous and everybody liked him. And in my experience with dealing with these serial killers, it just doesn't go away in their mind. This just doesn't happen like what we saw in the series. But back to you.
I would concur with everything you said, especially the last part. I mean, they really they take pains to humanize him, which is fine because that's what makes good television or good movies. But Gein was not a hero. He was not a hero, but he was not even an anti-hero. He was not, by any stretch of the imagination, he was a cold-blooded killer. Now, if we want to discuss how much of that is, I don't know, let's just say the evil of humanity, and how much of it was, a chemical imbalance or a medical condition, that's fine. But that's not what they were doing at the end. They really made it seem like he was this, for lack of a, I'm not going to use another creative word. He was a hero, and he wasn't. He was this. He was a cold-blooded murderer
And a very disturbed man that just doesn't go away with a pill that
totally. Actually, that's what I was going to say, Dr. John. When we were talking before about when I thought it was ridiculous how he consulted with Speck and all these other murderers. I believe, and I could be wrong, but I remember reading once that he was contacted early in his incarceration, and the profile, it might have even been John Douglas, the great profiler, just realized almost immediately that anything they were going to get out of Gein was just, nonsense, because he was, to use a little bit of an insensitive and non-medical term, batshit crazy. He was just, there's nothing he could bring to the table that would potentially help them. So he wasn't this sort of Hannibal Lecter-ish character spouting, incisive, commentary and helping them solve the cases. He was anything but. It was a waste of their time.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I also know a little bit of that backstory just from professional circles, and there's not even any really evidence that he helped in any cases that, again, was portrayed in the series. So getting back to your first couple comments, I think we have to look at this series in the lens with the lens of it's fictional. It's a fictional portrayal. I think there was some aspects of it that were great pieces of information for the general public, but most of all, it's a fictional portrayal of what happened.
I mean, a perfect example of that is, I'm saying that, well, we're not, you don't see me, so I'm smirking a little bit, but if I was Bernice Warden's family, I mean, I literally would sue Netflix for this because the truth is, and I don't dislike that part of the film, but the truth is they portray Bernice Warden as sort of this, upper middle-aged, sexy seductress who seduced Gein, and none of that ever happened. I mean, they knew each other because they lived in the same town, but there's no evidence that they had, any relationship. And if you go online, and I've done that, I'm smiling, I'm laughing because it's so ridiculous. She is this old, sort of just generic-looking woman, and then you watch this Netflix series, and Gein has her bent over the chair, and they're having this passionate sex.
Well, that's what's so ridiculous is that his mother I know that it's true that his mother was extremely religious and evangelical and to the point where she would, tell him women are demons and they're bad and they're evil. His mother wasn't attractive. And I think the women that he dug up or killed probably had a little more of that look to them. And it sensationalizes it so much to seem like he's looking for some hot piece of ass because he also seemed I watched a couple episodes of the show. I have not watched the whole thing like Dr. John Mayer. But when I watched it, I was disappointed because I was like, people that don't know who Ed Gein is, like there's a lot of people who don't. Like my trainer was like, I watched this Ed Gein monster. It's amazing. I didn't know about this guy. But half of it is fiction.
Yeah.
Do you feel that was done that way in the series of Dahmer or in the Menendez? I felt that those were kind of realistic to me. I mean, from what I knew.
What is, and this is actually, I didn't think of this until now, but one of the things you're right about, and one of the things that strikes me is in this Gein miniseries, they do in some ways portray him as, not in some ways, they absolutely do. They portray him as the grandfather of serial killers, where everybody looks back to Ed Gein as sort of an inspiration. And when I say everybody, I mean the other serial killers, Speck, Bundy, all those guys, look back to him. And they really do sort of, the show, promotes him as, the first. And in some ways he was and the most well-known and how he really has infused pop culture. And he has. But what's interesting, and I'm going to bring it all back, is when you mentioned those other guys, like Ramirez and stuff, if you ask the man on the street, even today with this show coming out, but certainly before, Gein is not nearly as well known still as Bundy, as Dahmer, as Speck, as Ramirez, as, all those guys, Hillside Strangler, Son of Sam, all those guys are burned in our consciousness. Now we, meaning the three of us sitting here, might know the name Ed Gein, and a lot of people do too, but I guarantee you, we do a little man on the street experiment, not a chance that he's anywhere up there with these other folks.
Agreed. He's not talked about, you're right, as some kind of the beginning of serial killing.
Because he wasn't a serial killer, was he?
Totally. No,
Yeah.
We can spend the whole episode debating this, but by the strict definition of a serial killer, he was not, unless, Dr. John, you want to correct me, he absolutely was not a serial killer. He killed two people that we absolutely know of. My business partner, Alex, is of the opinion, and many other people are, that he did kill his brother as well, who supposedly perished in a fire. But still, compare him to Gacy, to the Green River Killer, to Bundy, and they're two different animals and probably pathologies, unless I'm wrong, Dr. John.
You could speak to that. You could speak to that. You're right on. Yeah.
The pathology of Gein, it seems extremely infantile. Like he's very, like Dahmer didn't. Well, they all seem sort of immature, but Bundy and Gacy and Son of Sam, they didn't have that same sort of like, please do this, Mama. You know what I mean? There's this sort of like childlike mentality, and I don't want to say anything that sounds wrong or not sensitive, but there is, especially in the beginning of the show when his mom is chewing him out, and he's sort of like meek. He seems very young.
That does exist in some of the other famous serial killers and serial killers that aren't famous that I've worked with and evaluated, etc. That domination from a mom or a father, it is often a thread that runs through, but it's not any causal effect. It's not throughout all of the serial killers, but you do see that a lot. But I think you're right, Stacey. It's to an extreme with Eddie. That's why I like using the name, because he was developmentally stunted. He wasn't able to develop the kinds of human attributes that make you a successful individual. Maybe like his brother was semi successful young man. So
The one thing I feel like in some ways we're not really doing the show a disservice, but we're being critical of it as opposed to saying what we liked about it. One of the things that I really did admire was this seems like such a little thing to say, but the production design. I went to school up in Wisconsin, in Madison, not up a few hours north where Plainfield is. But I've spent time driving around that area, and they did do a fantastic job of creating that milieu. They really did.
I thought as a series it was made well, but again, it's fiction, and because we're experts looking at this, we can kind of pick apart the reality of it. But it was well done. The costume was great, the scenes were great. I was watching it also, Adam, and going, they did a good job of recreating that house. It's really good.
Totally.
Must have cost them a bundle.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one of the things in terms of fictionalizing this story is, again, not to keep perseverating on other serial killers, but if you look at Gacy's story, at Bundy's story, there's so much there. I mean, every single one of the murders. I mean, Gein lived a mundane, boring life. There were these little spasms of violence. I mean, look, there's nothing more sort of grotesquely cinematic than when he stringed Bernice Worden up like a deer. But his daily life, it's tedium. It really is.
I was telling Stacey, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was telling Stacey as we approached this episode, I'm going, I had a hard time getting through the series, not because of the horror, but it was just like, it was tedious. His life, and I think you hit it on the head. You answered the question I had in my head. Why am I having a difficulty here? It was a well-made show. There was some interesting aspects to it, but I was like, wow, this is a grind to get through for me. And you hit it on the head. His life wasn't that interesting.
Right.
I keep trying to watch it, and it's a little boring. It's just a little boring. So that and Dahmer I found to be fascinating. It was gross, but it was wonderful, and I loved the style of that, the costuming, the set, everything was great. His apartment, and I did love the Menendez brothers. That was a little kitschy. Sometimes it was a little like, what's the word for it? It was like cutesy. I'll tell you this from my point of view. The Dahmer one, it seemed to follow, because I've done a lot of research. It seemed to follow what happened with him and the people he killed. And the Menendez brothers were still, none of us know whether or not his parents were horribly abusive to them. I believe they were, but that was the way that one was portrayed. So I feel like it gave us sensitivity toward the Menendez brothers, and now I want them to be released. Now this next one, again, like I said, I only got through a little of it. It just didn't feel the same in terms of the intention of the series. What is it trying to get? Is it trying to get new people interested in Gein? Is it supposed to, what's the point of it?
Yeah, and also I think what you're talking about too, in terms of production, is what Adam and I were talking about earlier on, which that last episode, and audience, if you haven't seen it, the last episode ends with a dance number. It's like,
why didn't they call me? I could have choreographed that.
Yeah, you
this
needed to, because it was also a pretty bad dance number. People flailing around. It looks like
Thriller,
like those blow up things that car dealers have outside.
It was so silly. I mean, I assume that
campy. That's the word.
It was it was beyond campy, but it was camp that didn't work. Sometimes camp works perfectly. In this case, in my humble opinion, it didn't. It didn't fit the nature and the tone of the series, or what I thought the tone should be. It was very silly. I feel like if the three of us could sit in the writers' room when they were conceiving that, I feel like they said to themselves, "Listen, guys, let's take a big swing and try to, do something memorable. And instead of being sort of jaw dropping and memorable, it just became, goofy and a little silly. And look, it's tough.
Yeah.
I understand. It is tough when you try to understand and get into a character's brain, especially a schizophrenic, like Gein was, or anybody with mental illness. And you sometimes have to take these cinematic techniques and use them to portray that mental illness. Sometimes I think it works perfectly. In this case, unfortunately, I didn't. I think overall, if the series, could have been compressed into a fewer episodes, and if they excised some of the parts that I think didn't work, it would have been a much stronger, better, and more fulfilling series. But there were also some parts that were really strong and powerful. So I think it's a mixed bag overall.
Menendez, and I know I really love this series. Felt very almost satirical in nature, where it was like, oh, so over the top at certain points that you were kind of like, oh, is this supposed to prove a point to us? The first one, Dahmer, no satire to me. And then this one, and that's what I like to look at when you see a series like Monster and you see all these different takes on different characters. What is it that the public should get from it? But
Stacey, I like what you're saying, because as much as we're being critical of the series, you're praising the production and the making of the series, and I'd have to agree. Again, it was well done. It was well done.
Yeah.
Again, not to throw my partner and best friend some praise, but I mean, if people really are interested in seeing, if they're interested in the life of Gein, and if they're listening to this podcast, I assume they should be. They should watch his documentary, the biography on Ed Gein, which was released on A&E probably over 20 years ago now. But still, to this day, even considering all the stuff that has been done, said, and shown about him since, that really is the most accurate and
to me,
and the best one.
Where can people find it?
And we referenced that in our earlier episode. So, audience, look towards our earlier episode when we had Alex Flaster on here, and he talked about the documentary, which it was documentary. It's based on reality. And as we said at the beginning in our introduction, that this is a fictional portrayal. So look towards that documentary as, a little more factual based. So
can people find that documentary?
You know what? I assume they can. I assume it's not only on A&E's website. I assume it's probably on Tubi or other streaming services. But, I don't know.
Do you know who produced it?
I have it in my office, but I'm not inviting all the listeners to come to my house and borrow it from my library. But yeah, look, if you want to seek it out and watch it, I think you'll be able to find it easily.
Alex Flaster happens to be my brother. And no, we don't spend time in the kitchen talking about serial killers all the time, but we did grow up with a mother who loved true crime, which gave us a very nice introduction to serial killers, which seems a little weird, but it's not in our family. So
you were born to do this, Stacey. We need to wrap up and let Adam go.
Yeah.
And create more wonderful things that he creates. And so, Adam, thank you
so
much
cool.
for again joining us. We can't thank you enough, and we will be plugging your work and praising you for the next 26 episodes, maybe 27.
I didn't do much, but I always appreciate the airtime, and thank you guys. And it was, if anything, it was great just to, I'm so busy nowadays, but it was great to force me to watch something that I really should have been watching. So again, as much as we seem like we might have criticized the show, it was an interesting 8 hours that I got to watch it. So thank you for that, and thank you for having me.
All right.
And one more question: if they were to do another monster series, Adam, what would you like to see?
Good question.
That's actually an excellent question, and you're putting me on the spot. So just give me 10 seconds to think about it.
Because I'm curious.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of an obscure one that people might not know about.
Can I tease you? Can I tease you a little bit?
Please.
Remember what we asked this question to Alex Flaster on our episode. And do you remember what his answer was? If he was going to direct and produce a a episode or a documentary on a serial killer, he would do
Well, I have my answer now, but I forget. You answer first.
H.H. Holmes.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Sorry. Yes.
H.H.
Stacey
Holmes
was asking me. Yeah. For people who don't know, I mean that the H.H. Holmes story has been sort of floating around Hollywood for decades now. Leonardo DiCaprio was attached at one point. I mean, and he is, during the Chicago Exposition, H.H. Holmes had a house of horrors where he had all these trap doors that fell into vats of acid. And
oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, it is a crazy, crazy story. And the fact that nobody has done it, and there's been 50 million shows about Dahmer and Gein, it makes no sense. But Alex is right, and that's the one I would pick too. H.H. Holmes.
Great, that was a great answer.
I'll write it up. I'll be glad to write the screenplay.
Yeah, and I think you can do the series, Adam, and I'll hire the actors. We're done.
Go.
Done and done.
From your
$5 million. From my lips to God's ears. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Take care.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Good to
Talk
see
to
you.
you soon.
Stay tuned next week where we explore and dive into Unknown Number High School Catfish on Netflix, where you're going to hear about an amazingly crazy case and hear all of our opinions on that. Can't wait.
Our theme music is written and performed by Midnight Current, and you can hear more from them on SoundCloud. Please visit podcandypodcast.com to learn more about us and listen to all of our episodes, or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much.
Pod Candy!